Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP. I'm doing this live stream just to try and get back into the swing of things. I haven't done a video in quite a while, and I'm rather apprehensive about coming out with a few videos that I have in mind. I have some topics in mind that I want to do, but I'm not sure or convinced of any one thing. And I've noticed my viewership has grown quite a bit, which is somewhat disconcerting because I am very unsure of whether or not I will offend somebody. Because I mean, it's not like really my mainstay to do videos on typology. I just happen to do videos in typology. I really just like to explore a wide range of topics and then talk about that which I feel is not well understood. And so when you traverse the ground, I guess the frontier of the unknown, as much as I do, you stand to offend somebody more readily than not. Um, uh, the thing I guess I would like to bring out and say is that hmm, knowing which direction to take things next is probably the hardest thing for me. And I would like some feedback. I will continue to do things on topology, but I mean, topology. I don't want to just turn into a channel on type. I guess I can start with this, or share some thoughts I have on factors concerning personality theory and typology. Um, damn it! Oh, sorry. Huh. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So some things concerning topology. So one thing I don't like is self-report questionnaires. Like I think that they're very inefficient. Like they have low retake test validity or low retake test reliability. And I think that's for the fact that there are no real psychometric diagnostics going on with those things. And what I mean is, you don't have to take a test. Like, there should be a test for intuition. There should be a test for like every cognitive function. And I don't know if I want to try and spend my time using the mathematics and statistics I know to develop such a test, but I mean, I think it's time. I have some real hunches about like the nature of intuition, and I guess I can go into those things, and it'll tell you why I think it would probably you could make a test right now for typology in a way that you wouldn't have been able to before. So there are only two viewers. I mean, I'm not I'm not concerned with the amount of people that are viewing. I'm just trying to get back into the swing of talking in front of a camera. I mean, I get pretty apprehensive about talking in front of a camera. I don't really like doing it. I mean, it's something I practice like anything else, and I have to build the skill back up, or else I'll just freeze up and not really have much to say. And I do most things impromptu, such that whenever I do a topic extemporaneously, I'll have more to say. Any or ni or both, or something else entirely where you mention intuition. Okay, so like, all right, so yeah, I'll talk about intuition, like in terms of this psychometric battery. So one thing that's very interesting about intuition is that it can be categorized by loose associations. And loose associations in the classical psychological context is typically associated with personality disorders like schizophrenia and borderline personality disorder and some other antisocial personality disorders. And what it mostly is choppy talk or speech, highfalutin, something you describe as highfalutin, choppy Word salad is another a phrase or expression that they use for that. But when you look at the neurology of the individuals that are neurology of individuals such as a schizophrenic or somebody who's schizotypal, you see that there's a downregulation of the myelination of the frontal region. So that just means that there is less white matter fidelity in the connectivity of the cortical structure that's going on there. So what that leads to is the fact that signals get crossed and they tend to associate things that are not closely related or wouldn't classically be associated. And I think that low levels of this, because if you have high levels of this, you're a schizophrenic or you have some other kind of personality disorder. But low levels of this is one characteristic of intuition, and it's where the out of kind of seemingly nowhere and random part synesthesia levels of Chris connection. Yeah, I mean, like it's the fact that cross connection. I get you. Yeah, it's the fact that the it's the fact that things are associated with one another that should not or would not typically be associated. And it's the fact that there's a downregulation of the frontal region that causes this association in the first place. This is something that's also prominent in highly creative individuals, and I think that's why intuitives have a flair for creative expressions and modes of art and even logical innovation and ingenuity. And it's also the case that I think that the creative, well, not the creative person, but like the creative person, the intuitive person has more activity in a certain type of a certain part of the brain called the precuneus or the default mode network, and this is typically responsible for metaphor ideation of self and processing various parts of the REM cycle. So the people who have more activity in their precuneus often daydream more than other individuals, and it's also why I think it's. And I think the reason I think that this is a part of intuition is because intuitive types are non-local, or at least what I call non-local. They never seem to be fully a part of any given experience that they're partaking in. I mean, and the consistent tendency for intuitive types to zone out or to distance themselves from the immediacy of things. That screams precuneus to me. And it's also the case that intuitive types in general are more likely to have what researchers call eureka moments. And do you think the Big Five and MBTI correlates? Example: low openness, sensing; low agreeableness, thinking; low consciousness, so on and so forth. Okay, so I'll finish this. I think, like, Jesus, why is this person? Sorry. Well, so yeah, aha moments. I think this, like, if you really wanted to know if somebody was intuitive or not, you could give them a remote association task, and they would score highly on it. They would score high on divergent thinking task, and they would score high on memory association tasks that are of a abstract nature. And so I think you could make a test that I guess stress these certain factors, and you could see whether or not somebody was actually intuitive. And so that's the thing about intuition that I had in mind. And I think you could honestly do this with more cognitive functions than we currently know. I mean, self-report questionnaires are pretty damn unreliable, and I think they're the worst. They're the worst forms of psychometric batteries that we have out there. And I would like to see that change, because then you wouldn't have to guess about. I mean, it's not like you could get 100% reliability with like a psychometric battery, but you could get like at least a 60% one, which is a hell of a lot better than the 20% reliability that self-report tests have. Now, is MBTI and Big Five correlated? Oh man, that's really hard for me to say, because the categories that or at least the traits the categories that exist in Big Five versus the categories that exist in MBTI are different, and it's the case that one thing that's funny about Big Five and MBTI is you can see that for Big Five, like openness to experience is a conflation or a merging of two, at least three cognitive functions in MBTI, and like openness to experience is basically extroverted sensing, extroverted intuition, and introverted intuition all rolled into one function, all rolled into one, I guess, personality dimension, if you will. And it's rather hard for me to tease away those things. I also know this, like I have a few NT friends who I've given the Big Five questionnaire to, and they're and like so I have an INTP friend, and I gave them the Big Five questionnaire, and they tested high on their levels of openness to experience, but also moderately high on their levels of conscientiousness. Then I gave the test to an INTJ friend, and they tested extremely high on conscientiousness, and then slightly high on openness to experience, and were average for their levels of agreeableness. Like this kind of scores that I was getting are all over the place. MBTI is meant to be an expression of depth psychology, which is dealing with the nature of a person. While Big Five is centered more on nurture. Um, I would say that MBTI is human anatomy the most vividly detailed system formed in your mind. I would say like yeah, MBTI is more focused on depth psychology, but I would say the Big Five. I mean, you can actually do genetic studies with the Big Five inventory that you can't do with MBTI because the constructs aren't very easy to test for. Like, if you wanted to test for, say, introverted thinking, I mean, that's really bloody freaking hard. Like, that's why not many people agree with the research that Dario Nardi did on types, but I mean, that's why Dario Nardi had to do his research in the way that he did with EEGs and self-report systems, because trying to find testable constructs with the cognitive functions, bloody freaking hard. Bloody freaking hard. That's why I just insist on like kind of drawing everything down to the neurophysiology, because I mean, at least with the neurophysiology, you can test for some things. Is what was the question, like? Let's see. Is human anatomy the most vividly detailed system formed in your mind? No, probably the most vividly detailed system formed in my mind is that of some branch of mathematics. I mean, I don't talk about math very much on this channel, but I probably know math and physics better than I know any other subject. I don't talk about I don't talk about them very often, because I spend all my time in it. I spend all my time with math and physics outside of like YouTube space, so I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, I like to try. I like to dabble at other things every now and then to have some variety. Um, I know this, like, part of the reason why I find human anatomy so important is because most phenomenon, even behavioral phenomenon, has some physiological correlate, something that corresponds to it, that can give better insight on the phenomenon than you had previously known. Because once you can, I guess, localize something to some anatomical piece, you can then begin to try and parsimony through the sea of genetic uncertainty that's certainly waiting for you once you try to correlate some genetic component to it. So that's the only reason why I like to start there. I mean, I don't think that you could perfectly describe the cognitive functions in terms of neurophysiology, but I give my best attempt because I would just like to see something potentially different happen with MBTI. I mean, like, I don't know if it's possible. Like, I really don't know if it's possible, but you know, I just try. I just try. Um, One thing that's really interesting about intuition, but I don't think, like, okay, so something about the Big Five that's very interesting is that certain like, okay, so you think that Big Five has a great correlation with environmental factors, but when you're looking at certain things like what percentile somebody tests in for a certain trait, when you find somebody who's in like the, say, the 75th or the 99th percentile for something like openness to experience or something like conscientiousness, you find a strong amount of genetic correlation with those kind of results. And I don't know why that is. And that's kind of why I tend to pay attention to the Big Five in the first place, because to me, possibly is what you're specialized in is extrapolating as an INTP. No, possibility is um. Uh, yeah, I mean, like I stay in the space of possibility. I mean, that's where I roam about. Um. But I know certainly with the, one thing I really want to understand is human nature. Like more so, I mean, I want to understand math and physics more than I probably want to understand anything else. But next to those two things, I want to understand human nature to, and I don't know why, but I mean, I really do. I mean, human beings stand to be the most interesting creatures on this planet to me, and it's the case that if we could figure out like just exactly what constituted our existence, I think that life would be more meaningful, and there we wouldn't get as many things wrong as we do now, in terms of our the way things are structured in our societies, like even in academia. Like academia is non-humanistic, like in the strongest ways, and how we tend to design things and make things in the first place are not very human friendly, like not in the slightest. And I think if we knew more about certain human factors, we would also have different. We would also curb our moral judgments of one another. Um, but I mean, that's the only offhand thing I can think of in terms of why I care to understand human nature as much as I do. And it's bloody interesting. So one thing is like when you see something occur in the world in terms of something that people tend to do, why asking yourself the question, why is it that way, and only that way, it why is it that way and no other way? When you get an answer to that question, it's bloody freaking interesting, man. You would just not guess, or you wouldn't anticipate it's like that. Human beings are probably they're the most surprising creatures that, I mean, like you could see. Nature's very surprising in general, but like, man, human beings are bloody fascinating. But yes, what do you think of a 9-5? Is it a modern slavery? 9 to 5, is it a modern slavery, and do we become more neo feudalistic society? I think most modes of operation in our society are going to have to be greatly revised, and I hope that they will be revised, because I don't think that so I think a 9 to 5 is outdated in the sense that it's something that was a part of an industrial age. It's not something that I think. Let's articulate this better. Um, One thing is certain. People don't find their jobs and their work meaningful. Also, mental health is not improving in America, and there is a serious issue in income inequality. And it seems to me that some of the best ways to address these issues is to break away from the current, I guess, modes of operating in the ways in which we do right now in American society. We have to abolish certain things like the 9 to 5, and we have to abolish certain practices. But it's going to take. I mean, it's going to take a lot of time, because one thing is people have to become far more. Uh, hmm, I would say fiscally mobile than they are now, and a lot of that has to do with yeah, I would say that that's accurate. My drive to understand people is to help optimize everyone's overall orientation to refine man's cultivation slash culture. Yeah, I mean, like, if you wanna, like, I mean, like, if I was honest in terms of the things that I really value, I value culture and genius probably more than I value any other things in the world. Um, Now on okay, so yeah, I mean, I think most of society is broken in terms of the ways in which it operates. I mean, we're hobbling along, but oftentimes I look at culture and I see, like, most times people look at culture and they probably envision one large functioning body. I have to go to sleep, but before I just wanted to say that your videos on INFJ explain stuff that could have ended my existential crisis super fast when I was a kid. Oh, well, I'm glad. I'm glad. Thank you for that. Um, uh, no, but one thing is, I mean, like, a lot of times people see culture as an able body, but I see most of it as a decayed, rotting husk. I mean, we're inhabiting a dead structure, and we have to figure out how to do things differently than we currently are doing them. And work definitely has to change, because one thing that's true is that you can't honestly get people to be productive people if you don't give them a certain amount of autonomy, and you don't give them a certain amount of control over the infrastructure of their work weeks. Probably but you know, most tasks, like most jobs people have, nobody would consider that I guess a viable means of running, like non-skilled labor. But I mean, hell, things have really got to change. For the mere fact that AI is just around the corner, and we have to really figure out how to learn to do things differently in terms of what we expect of one another, and what we accept as jobs, and what we think of in terms of our jobs. And I think that in a few years, I mean, like maybe 50 years, 9 to 5s won't exist any longer. And I don't think that they should. But yeah, those are my thoughts on a 9 to 5. I mean, doo-doo-doo. Okay, can I ask you guys, like, well, what are your thoughts of a 9 to 5? Part of the reason why it appears that we're becoming a more feudalistic society is because something's very wrong. I mean, with the ways in which we have our societies established, in the sense that we come from a history of small communities, and we come from a history of yes, yes. We come from a history of small communities, and we come from a history of consistent struggle. Two things a human being needs in order for them to feel that their life is meaningful is autonomy, close-knit communities, and struggle to overcome in the world. And part of the issue is um, uh, we underestimate human nature too often. And one good example is welfare. I mean, like I'm what most people would consider liberal, but I don't like the welfare state. And part of the reason I don't like the welfare state is because people really have a hard time appraising free. Like, period. Our brains are not very good at appraising free things. And what I mean is that we don't tend to respond well to free. Um, so a study was uh, blah, 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 social economic study was conducted where you have a Hershey's Kiss, and you have like one of those Godiva chocolates, and you tell your participants that the Hershey Kiss is 10 cents and the Godiva chocolate is 30 cents. Most people value the Godiva chocolate over, and you give each of your contestants 30 cents, and you decide, and you see whether or not they'll your participants 30 cents, and you see whether or not they'll spend 10 cents on the Hershey Kiss, or they'll use all 30 cents to buy the Godiva chocolate. And in most scenarios, everybody buys the Godiva chocolate. They use all of their 30 cents to buy the Godiva chocolate. And why is that? Because the Godiva chocolate is of greater quality and thus has higher value. And so we make, whenever things have and whenever we stand to lose things and we have to barter with a limited amount of resources, we tend to make better value-based decisions, like what to keep around and what not to keep around, and how to kind of plan about things. I mean, in general. And the reason we know this is because when immediately after they've gone through a few rounds of this, do you want the Hershey Kiss for 10 cents, or do you want the Godiva chocolate for 30 cents? They then do a 10-cent discount, where the Godiva chocolate is now 20 cents and the Hershey Kiss is $0, so it's basically free. Once the Hershey Kiss becomes free, most people take the Hershey Kiss. Not that the bloody Hershey chocolate has increased in its value, but just that people appraise free differently. Whenever people don't have to pay for something, and whenever people don't have to earn something, they appraise its value very poorly. And this ties to why I don't like welfare, because whenever you give somebody something for free, they tend to not appraise the value of things around them well. And they do not make good long-term decisions. So, because if you run if you run the game in several iterations, what the people stand to lose in terms of the value, they can make up for it in terms of the money that they had overall. But once you make something free, people don't think well, and the statistics you see for people who and trust me, I'm left. Like, I'm so left, I'm left. But the likelihood for the likelihood for a male to commit a violent crime once they've been a part of the welfare state is great. The likelihood for somebody to have a child before the ages of 16, before the ages of 18 is great. The likelihood for them to be a part of a single parent home is great. The likelihood for them to not get a college degree is great. The likelihood, or greater, for them being a part of the welfare state. And I mean, I think you should help those who can't help themselves. I mean, I'm so for that. I don't like to see people suffer, but I don't like it. I also don't like the misapprehension of human motivation. I mean, the welfare state has to be revised. So free is dealt with in a similar way to which the infinite is within the mind. Yeah, free is poorly bloody freaking appraised. And the reason why we don't know how to deal with free is because we never experienced free in terms of our growing up in any given landscape. Nothing's bloody freaking free. And the only way our value systems work in two ways. If something's rare, it's valuable. And if something was hard to earn, it's valuable. If you take away rare and you take away valuable, you have a horrible decision-making process that's going to occur. I mean, people just don't tend to make very worthwhile appraisals of things once those items have been taken out of the equation, because their brains, our brains are very old. They're not adapted to this modern game we're playing very well. And so when you throw something like free in there, it just screws with the system. And I mean, and it dampens human motivation. Human beings are pretty much the only thing that can motivate a human being is a challenge. I mean, very really something within their scope of accomplishment, because they need something to feed the positive reward network. But when you do free, nobody that you're killing human motivation by giving them free things. Like you really are killing human motivation by giving people free things. I mean, whatever motivation they would have had, it diminishes greatly, and whatever judgment capacity they would have had in terms of what to do with that money once they receive it, gone. Because if you have to earn money and it's a commodity and it's a scarcity, you tend to make better decisions with it. Now, not everybody's going to make good decisions with money, period, because most people, there's differences in human ability and most people aren't fiscally educated. But the kind of reverberating consequences you get by giving it to somebody for free. Well, I mean, you even see this with rich kids. I mean, like most people who inherit their wealth, or lottery winners. This is another great example. Like most lottery winners don't keep their earnings and don't keep their money because they didn't earn it actually. Like it's like if scarcity and struggle, rarity, scarcity, struggle, they have to be fundamental components of your apprehension of something. Because if they're not, the decisions that you just tend not to make very good decisions. Like you probably won't keep that money. And if it involved welfare, you'll probably be on that system for far longer than should be necessary or is prudent. I mean, like that's a serious issue. And that's a mishandling of human nature because we don't really understand human motivation. And so we make legislations and we do certain things that just don't make sense. Like they really don't make sense. They don't make sense if you would like your societies to flourish and be vibrant and full of ingenuity and breakthroughs and whatnot. So that's why I care to understand. That's why I care to understand human nature because I would like to see those things change, and it's the case that they're going to have to change because things are only going to get harder. I mean, they really are. In certain regards, like the information demands are only going to get larger. Our ability to be able to adapt and to think and to learn multiple skills is only going to increase. If we want to stave off the oncoming of AI such that we have some jobs for the future and there's some dignity for mankind, I mean, like, there has to be some serious revisions. And if we don't want to see all the damn ecological and political things get to all the ecological and potential political crises that we stand to face come to a head, we have to get rather creative and we have to get human nature deadly accurate if we want to I guess bring the greatest possible expressions out of ourselves, which are going to be very necessary very soon. And by very soon, I mean like within the next 100 years, that's a short amount of time. Like, so take that for what it's worth. And so that's why I'm interested in those sorts of things. Now, let's see. Yeah, you should say value is equal to the effort we use to obtain something. Like that's a real equation in human psychology. And value is equal to the unlikelihood of attaining something or the rarity of it. And value is also the metric which you use to make long-term decisions with. And so whenever you scratch value, you compromise a lot of cognitive capacities. So, we shouldn't we shouldn't do that. Or we should use it very sparingly, and we should not use it in the ways in which we currently use it, mostly irresponsibly. I would say. No. So I don't really know what video I should make next. I'm getting rather long in the tooth, and I have so I'm going to kind of float this here and see how this goes. Okay, so moral veganism. Not a big fan of it. Not a big fan of it in the slightest, and there are some real reasons. I mean, so don't misunderstand me. Like, I think certain is my IQ above 140. Yes, but yes, but I'm not gonna give any numbers. I don't talk about my IQ. I don't talk about it. But moral veganism, not a fan of it. Like, not a fan of it in the slightest. Like, certain things about the necessary I guess revisions of the meat industry is wholly necessary, and some legislation to um, I guess mediate the activity of certain corporate conglomerates would also be welcomed on my part. But like the moral injunctions are, I guess like the moral criticism or the supposed moral injunctions, the supposed moral injunction to end animal cruelty or to establish animal rights. Like, are you vegan or vegetarian? No, I'm not. I'm not. I am like I'm a rationalist. That's just what I decide to call myself. Like, and it's the case that I understand like certain arguments, and like I think that they're right. Like, we should definitely do something about the rainforest. We definitely should levy some serious blows to certain industries for the ecological problem that they are. And I think that you should try to have the healthiest diets that you possibly can. I am all for those things, but the moral injunctions, I can't take it. I can't take it. And by the moral injunction, we have free adult movies online. Does it affect the value of women? Well, I would say this, that it certainly affects the value of human relation. Um, uh, yeah, because I mean, I guess you could say by consequence it affects the value of women, but I wouldn't say yeah. So we'll go with that. By consequence, it affects the value of women because um we're not very honest with ourselves in terms of how the dynamics between. Oh, I saw the wheels of TI spinning. Um, uh, we're not we're not very well at understanding the dynamics of the interaction between men and women from, like, I guess, a neurological standpoint, and it's the case that if you make something like sex free and readily available, you get very socially and emotionally dismotivated men. I mean, and because you have socially and emotionally dismotivated men, it affects the value of women. It more so affects the ability of men to appraise value in the first place in terms of meaningful sexual relationships and whatnot. Okay, thank you. That's truly what it affects, and it's the case that it's the case that pornography is somewhat problematic. I mean, I don't. Yeah, like, all right. So I would tell a guy this. Like, I'm not conservative at all, and I think like whatever you want to do is whatever you want to do in your spare time. But I would say go out and try and convince somebody to sleep with you rather than and take pornography, because it's not the case with all men that this happens. But I mean, typically, like, you don't find people. I mean, it depends on the amount of pornography you consume on a day-to-day basis. But like what you've said, sexuality is a very, very powerful motivator, and it's the case that it's probably the number one reason why people act in the first place. I mean, I don't think Freud was wrong about that. Like, I really don't. I mean, it's not the only. There's certainly various other drives that cause people to act. social ones at that don't have anything to do with I guess our innate mammalian factors, but there are not many others. And it's the case that you don't really want to go compromising that faculty in yourself, because it's too connected to your reward network. And when you start messing with the reward network, you start messing with your salient systems. Salient systems are the systems that determine what's relevant in a given landscape. And your ability to rely on your salient systems for long-term appraisal diminishes when you start messing with your reward network. And that's, I mean, that's really the danger of that's the danger of any addiction. I mean, like, that's really the danger of any addiction. It really, like, it screws with that. And pornography consequently does that in men, and consequently affects the value of women. And I think, like, in the most observable way you can see this is that should we break up the big four: Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple? Like, they're monopolies. You know, they really are. Like, but I don't know. Like, God, like, that's hard. Like, I mean, I think, how do you recommend I prepare for classical mechanics? First, upper class classical mechanics course. It's not introductory physics. I'm thinking of just going over a textbook of my choice during break. Okay, so I think I can answer Fossilology's question better than I can answer the one about the big four. So for classical mechanics, I would recommend that you spend more time studying the mathematics than you study the physics portion of it. I mean, probably one thing that people don't, I guess, first realize about physics is that a lot of the consequences of physical phenomena, we know them because of the way that the math turns out, and the mathematical arguments that you're going to have to lay out for yourself if you want to present any physical argument is pretty rigorous. And so you want to get very comfortable with that, and derivation, like being able to go in between different trig identities. I mean, if you're good at playing around with trig identities in high school, then, you know, physics should be easy for you. And integration, differentiation, and separation of variables when it comes to differential equations, like, you want to make sure you have those sorts of things down, and what you can and knowing how to interpret a mathematical result. That's very important. I would say spend a lot of time focusing on mathematics, like becoming very, very good at wielding the mathematics to your advantage. Then start consuming some of the theoretical aspects of physics. You know, knowing why. So, for example, everything has a definition. Hey, everything has a definition in physics, and why those things have the definitions that they do come down to just some mathematical consequences that, you know, are not arbitrary, but are certainly non-intuitive. And so you wanna be able to grok those things, because they allow you to solve harder and more complex problems in physics that aren't so obvious when somebody doesn't tell you what formula to use. Also, when you're studying physics, try to figure out how all things are connected and the limit to things. I mean, that's definitely what you want to learn. I mean, a lot of times when I was studying physics, I just figured out how to formulate the problem and set up the equations. and I got the I got the I manipulated the equation to whatever result I was supposed to have and didn't plug the numbers in. Because if you can figure out how to formulate what they're asking you, if you can formulate the problem, and then you can derive the necessary mathematics and present the correct argument, you've won half the bloody freaking battle. Because plugging things into the damn equation after that is either going to be determined by your ability to use arithmetic or a calculator, and like that's trivial. I mean, that's so very trivial. I mean, it would behoove you to become very good at formulating the physical concepts and using mathematics to describe those formulations. I mean, even if you're doing physics on a computer, that's the stuff you're going to have to program into a computer, and that's the thing that's hardest for people. And I tell you, if you're not good at algebra and calculus, man, physics is going to be hard. I mean, you should be quite capable at those things. So, and if you want a good physics, I mean, like I basically just learned physics through doing problems. I mean, I don't like I read physics. I didn't read introductory physics textbooks. Like when I was first starting to do physics, I just did the problems. I didn't I read I do not read introductory things. I mean, I just really don't, cuz they're only a I don't like part to whole learning. I like whole to part, and I'd much rather learn how to think of the thing. Um uh can you describe what happens to an INTP when they drink too much coffee, alcohol, drugs? Oh man. I would much rather learn how to think of the thing in my own idiosyncratic way, and then see the overall structure of the thing. Like one. Hold on, I'll go grab a Dover book that I think is pretty good. I'll show you. I'll present three books that you could probably find somewhere online for physics, classical and mechanical wise, that I think is pretty good. Give me a moment. What did I do? Like, God damn it. Dun, 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 dun. Bloody hell. Like, okay, sorry about that. All right, so this is probably one of my favorite books on classical mechanics. It's by H.T. Corbin and Philip Stelf, and it's classical mechanics, second edition. It's a Dover book. I mean, it's pretty popular. It's a good one, and fundamental laws of physics. This is more for the theoretical side of things. You should also know like what type of physics you want to be involved with, like experimental or theoretical. Um, Um, it's published by Addison and Wiley. And Mechanics Part 2. This is honestly a book for mechanical engineers, but the problems in it are very good, so I like it. Okay, so those are some suggestions. Do you think I'm thinking about the radical condensed matter? Yeah, that's kind of the road I'm going down myself. Do you think your pure math training helped you in your physics classes? I'm a bit bummed that I won't be able to take any proof-based upper level math courses. Oh yeah, like I mean like I'll be honest like me like I swim in the mathematical ocean every day and my comfort with math really aided me in my studying of physics because I could just understand why the heck something was the way that it was just by looking at the math. Can you describe what happens to INTPs when they drink too much coffee, alcohol, or other drugs? Okay, so this is one thing I have to say about like introverted sensors in general. Like, I'm sorry. Be careful of what you decide to practice because you're more of a habitual creature than you know. And it's the case that if you don't want like one thing about introverted sensing that's pretty dang I guess potentially ensnaring is the fact that if you tend to warm yourself up to some practice, you become comfortable with it. And if you become comfortable with something, you start to depend on it. And it's the case that if you don't, if you're not particularly keen on developing any sort of dependency on something, like be wary of what you decide to consume on a day-to-day basis. I would also say that any INTP that becomes I guess ensnared by some I tend to describe things as addictions because they're just reward loops being acted out. I mean like like that typically you don't reason very well. I mean like even somebody like an INTP, I mean your greatest strength is your ability to reason about things in the world. And when you have some sort of neurological dependency, I mean, it really hampers your ability to reason, period, even if you weren't an INTP. And I think it's the case that if you make it such that, it's already hard in some respects for you to keep up consistent patterns and routines. Like trying to start studying when you know it's good for you can be a rather difficult thing for somebody like an INTP. Well, if you instantiate a habit that causes you to always divert your attention from whatever it is you're doing, such as something like coffee or alcohol or anything like that, I mean, it's going to be even harder. INTPs are always on the thin edge of being complete losers. I mean, like we have the capacity to do some very exceptional things, but we also have the capacity to kind of get stuck in rather divisive ruts. And I think that you only increase the probabilities of those things occurring if you decide to get a little too I guess permissive of certain things. I mean, like I casually drink, and I'll have a chai latte every now and then or something like that. But I mean, I don't make a habit out of a lot of things because I know that they'll be easily instantiated, and I know that I have a hard time paying attention in the first place, and I don't think I need a caffeine addiction to exacerbate the issue, and I also don't think that like one thing I notice about myself, like I've been to Vegas and things like that, and anytime I start like, okay, so you're already kind of exploratory, whether you know you are or not, and you're a very open person to some degree if you're an INTP. Decisions you think you would never make, you will make them. Like if you consume the right substances, and it's the case that you had ought to be very careful of what you don't know what lives inside of you sometimes. Like And so just be careful. I mean, I can see how I can the practicing being overly consumptive with any one substance could lead to a downregulation of an INTP's reasoning capacities and make them far more reclusive, far more sedentary, and less motivated. And you already struggle with motivation, so like I like don't do that one. Oh man. Uh, Hi. Let's see. Yeah, ultimately if an INTP like decides to do too many drugs, they're gonna kill their motivation and ability to be relational and find any given social context meaningful. Like, and you already have issues with that, so don't exacerbate it. Don't exacerbate it. It's not a good idea. Um, uh, let's see. Are you interested in the philosophy of math? Which school do you ascribe to? Platonism, formalism, etc. Man, like I'm like very okay. Yeah, so I'm a math hippie, I guess is the best way I can describe myself. Like how I came to start doing math and taking it serious. I guess like the real story, I suppose I could tell, so that it makes sense why I think of math in the way that I do. So, before I was a mathematician and I was a physicist, I was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitor and a wrestler. And I competed in a lot of tournaments and things, and I won things and whatever. And so I was pretty convinced at that point in time. Yeah, I answered. All right, so I did answer the question about INTPs and coffee. Now I can re-answer it again because you had coffee, alcohol, and other drugs. No, it's okay. I'll go over it again. So you had coffee, alcohol, and other drugs. The problem with so the main problem is with the fact that INTPs are introverted sensors. You tend to be quick to instantiate habits and loops, I think, and it's the case that yeah, I'm going to upload the stream. Yeah, I'll upload the stream. You can listen to it later. All right, all right, all right. Okay, so look, all right. So this is how I got into math because I injured my knee, and so I can no longer be an athlete, and I became pretty dang nihilistic and hopeless. And then one day, you're welcome. Now, and one day, I mean, I had to take like math classes because it was just required of you when you're doing a lot of your lower division undergraduate work, and I never did my damn homework in the first place. But one day, I mean, I was pretty damn nihilistic and brooding. I just decided to open a math textbook and start working in it, and I didn't know before I jumped into that textbook about the wonders of mathematics, but I started working with sequences and series and mathematical induction, weak induction, and strong induction. And when I saw the idea of mathematical sets, like I was blown away. Like I felt like saying bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, like, and math revivified me and basically gave me hope again. And so, like, I'm a little math hippie. Like, if you talk to me on my campus, like, if I ever tutor somebody, I'm almost like a little math evangelist. I try to convert people into seeing things mathematically. Now, what that means to me is that I guess like math and physics are very peculiar things to me. I mean, they mean a great deal to me, and they're the substance that keeps me going day to day. And so um, uh, I tend to think of math as my own thing, not like I don't tend to follow any single school of thought. Or at least that's what I want to do. I want to turn math into my own thing. Like I want it to be my thing personally. Like which is really really weird. Like I mean like it really is. Like cuz I'm not like that about most things, but the thing that I tend to the thing that I tend to want to see with mathematics is it for it to reveal itself to me. I don't want to impose like I don't think I like I guess I don't think I can know the nature of the thing. I think I just have to let math act through me and show me what it is. And that's very transcendental and hippie sounding. And so I just call myself a math hippie. I don't really ascribe to a specific school of mathematical thought. Now, do I think there's a mathematical universe? Yes. Do I think it's out in the world? Partly. And do I think it's in the world of the of human cognition? Also partly. It's a bit of both because mathematics is a study of patterns, and human beings first started encountering these patterns out in the world, and then we abstracted those patterns to greater and greater decontextualized resolutions of abstraction. And those decontextualized patterns of those decontextualized patterns became or are what we know as mathematics. And so in that way, it's both. Like I don't really like I don't you know I can't really separate the two. In other words, you're Thanos and math is the spirit of death. Marvel Comics, yeah. That was funny. Yeah, basically. Okay. I I guess like I'd describe myself as a formalist. I just think math itself is a tool. I say physics and science is more fundamental. Hmm. I think math is a science and an art. I mean, I do think that. I think there's a part of math that is the tool, and I think that there's a part of math that is something living and breathing in of itself. And I like both parts. I mean, I really do. Like, I got no qualms with either dispositions. In fact, I guess like I appreciate both. I think what's fundamental is the tendency to see patterns in nature, and I think our ability to abstract those patterns and generalize them to various degrees are what's fundamental, and mathematics and physics are two veins of that activity. Physics more so for what's actually before us. Mathematics for what could possibly emerge if you just yeah, math is certainly a living and evolving language. Like it, I mean, like math has a pulse and a beat to it. I mean, you could say that the abstraction has soul, like if you so wanted to anthropomorphize it in such a manner. I jokingly say this, but I say math and physics are goddesses. Would you say the axioms start from the physics? No, 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 no. I wouldn't say that. I mean, like it depends on what mathematics you're talking about because um uh, this is why I think math is bloody freaking interesting. I mean, like you wouldn't like hmm. So this is one thing that's interesting. So say you wanted to square really large numbers, right? Like I'm gonna use 137 as an example. I mean I know it's not a super large number, but it's three digits. Most people can't square three-digit numbers in their head. But what you can do is this: you can say 137. The square of 137 is the same thing as the sum of 100 squared. You can do 100 squared. You can say that that's 100 plus 37 squared. then you know you can write 100 plus 100 plus 37 squared as 100 squared plus 2 times 100 times 37 plus 37 squared. You can now, and once you realize you can find the squares of basically any number, so long as you can write it as the sum of two simpler numbers of whom you know the square for, you can find the square of any bloody number. Then say you want to take the fact that you can write any kind of square as a sum of two things, and you want to generalize that concept to some a and b. Now you start getting the concept of a polynomial. And then when you start asking, if we chain together these types of abstract operations and relations between different powers of variables and expressions, you get something like an infinite polynomial. I mean, and that's where that's not where the idea of Taylor and Maclaurin series come from, but I mean, that's freaking, that blew my mind. That's bloody freaking interesting. The fact that, you notice just a simple pattern in terms of the operation of numbers, and then it leads to something like a polynomial, which has a distinct character to it. I mean, depending on what polynomial you're looking at, and you can tell this thing by way of what, you can tell the distinct characteristic of the damn thing when you look at it, or when you graph it. And, even more so, if you start applying different kinds of means of operation to it, like say a derivative and a limit, you can find out a whole hell of a lot of things about the function itself that you wouldn't have known before, that give you the ability to start describing things about your own number system, which were completely unknown to questions that were completely unknown to the Greeks. Things that are just enormously interesting. And for that reason, I like math, just pure math for the sake of it. I mean, that's what I like about it. But I mean, I like it I like the tool of mathematics as well. But yeah, okay. Now let's see. Math is absolutely a language, and it's living in it, and it's evolving always, because it's a human enterprise. And so long as it's not and so long as it's not Latin, it's continuing to live and evolve. Okay, I'm going to check the time, and okay, it is 9:30 where I'm at. This is West Coast time. So I'm going to have to sign off because I have class and work tomorrow morning. Before I sign off, can anybody tell me what they would like to see me cover next? Any topic in video. I'm just doing this to try to get back into the swing of things. I know I'm going to come out with another video this week, but I haven't made a video in a while, and I get kind of shy getting behind the camera, and so I have to ease myself back into this. Any suggestions? More INFP videos. Maybe right side, left side, brain, art/science. Social engineering, some types. Oh, hold on. Social engineering, some types. What do you mean by social engineering, some types? That's pretty interesting. Can you expound upon that? Cover your gospel, your love of math. No. I'm not gonna do that. Most people don't like math, so I keep it away from most people. Social engineering, some types. What do you mean by that? And the right side, and okay, so a hemispheric divide. Hemispheric divide of the brain. That's something that's damn sure interesting. Looking at yeah, in regards to social engineering types. But what do you mean by social engineering types? What is that? Social engineering, how to social engineer an ISFJ, INFJ. But when you mean social CF Joseph has a video on social engineering. Check them out. They're on YouTube. Oh, but couldn't you just tell me what he means by social engineering? Because social engineering seems a rather vague term to me. I know it like as a field. Oh, manipulating them. How to manipulate? Okay. I don't know if I want to give the powers for evil. Like, all right. So you mean like how to deal with various types? I mean, like, okay, I know I'm gonna go with right brain, left brain. I know I'm going to go with the hemispheric divide of the brain because that's bloody freaking interesting. Like what they should do with their lives, how you should interact with them, like what though? Like there are a lot of questions you can ask. Like manipulating them. I guess like yes, I can say like how to handle ISFJ or something like that. I don't know. Like I know this like there's some things people have to just give up like in certain interactions like, like I mean if you want me to talk about things like that. Um I know I want to make a video on the phenomenology of INTPs. It's just taking me some time. Like that's something that's you know, one thing I can tell you, I do not like the idea of getting things wrong, and like I'm always worried about releasing a video and it just being erroneous. Like I don't want to do that, and that makes me very much apprehensive in terms of releasing. Yes, as an INTP, how do you gain an edge over other types? I'm slow in deliberation. I mean, like that's really like how I gain an edge in over other types. Like, most types are far more reactive than INTPs are, and part of the reason why INTPs have the success. No, no, no. I'm about to explain like exactly what that means. I'm not gonna leave it general. Like, so one thing about INTPs is that they're slow to act. They're quicker to observe something and make a series of judgments about the thing first before they act. And I mean, that's really why, and that's really how an INTP acts as a tacticianer. Because if I can watch you for some time and start mapping out the patterns of your behavior, I mean, like how I decide I'm going to handle you and deal with you, it is both a weakness and a strength, very situational. Yeah, 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 yeah. It is both a weakness and a strength, but I mean, like, if you want to talk about like the two things INTPs have is ingenuity and I guess delayed a capacity to delay judgment in response to things. I mean, being creative and having the capacity to delay judgment and a response gives you a very strong boon in the intellectual domain. Or whenever you're being strategic, that's very useful whenever you're being strategic, because typically you can come up with something that somebody's not going to guess, like they're just not going to expect it, and typically that thing is very well tailored to whatever it is you're dealing with, because you understand what you're dealing with better than most people do, because you take the time to really figure the thing out, and that's because you're slow to make a judgment or come to a conclusion. Because the funny thing about conclusions is they tend to stop thinking. Like the quicker you, Ti Hero, absolutely. The quicker, the quicker you make a judgment about something, the quicker it is you end your thinking about it, and so that's why INTPs delay conclusions. I mean, it's very hard to get them to budge on a decision or to make a decision, but the fact that it takes them forever in a day to make a decision is also why they're very powerful decision makers, and also why that they're very successful in certain domains of thought. But that's how they get an edge. Like that can be applied in a multitude of ways. Like okay, so I mean, like, I'm not like the most socially sophisticated of individuals. Like, all right, social engineering. I mean, that's hard. All right, so, As an INFP, do you commit to making a choice that will drastically affect your future when there are so many social pressures? Oh man. Okay, so like, all right, so one thing I have to say to introverted feelers is, or to you in particular, because you're an introverted feeler, is that um uh, you're self-referential, and so the first place you're going to reference is the internal landscape. And I would say this, like, okay, yeah. I would say this. Like, I'll finish with this. I'll finish with this INFP question. I would say this, like, one thing you have to learn to do is to keep something that you can value and trust as objective. Like, that's a you're welcome. One thing you have to do as an INFP is come up with something you can value and trust as objective. Like, you have to learn to value and trust some form of objectivity. And I'm not saying like that INFPs don't, but typically when introverted feelers in general are put under a tremendous amount of pressure, the the impersonal effects are not the first place you want to turn. So I would say this: before you get into seriously demanding social pressures and situations, get a set of facts and statistics that is salient to something you value, and really begin to understand them and know them. Get to understand them and know them so well that you do not have to think about them very often, that they become a part of your internal value corpus. That way, when you're put in scenarios and situations where you're being stressed to make a decision, um, uh, and being heckled and I guess manipulated by others in terms of the overall I guess fray of the heat of the moment, you can reference that instead of referencing your internal state, which is being greatly affected by the external chaos that you're a part of. Because whenever it comes down to making some decision or something that's going to affect you in the long term, you want to yeah you want to Yeah, you want to establish something that you can just, because you know this as an introverted feeler and an extroverted thinker. What you mostly care about is the result that actually occurs, and because of that, sometimes you can be rather quick about doing things, and that can honestly be problematic for you in the long run. But so long as you make sure you have in that value structure a system of facts that you really abide by, they will make it such that whenever you make those quick decisions, they're things that are calculated into that frame of reference, such that in terms of an overall probability, you will be more likely to hit the mark whenever you feel pressured and have to make a snap or a fast judgment. Um, uh, Work certain intuitions into you such that when you want to be instinctual and rely on that corpus of values and snap judgments, that they're there to be in your service and at your aid. So that'd be my suggestion. That'd be my suggestion. Okay. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna say that I'm going to with the videos. I'm going to come back with videos on right and the right and left hemispheric divide. I will I'll look up C.S. Joseph and see what the heck he's talking about with social engineering, and see if that's something I feel I can tackle. And I'll come back with videos. I'll definitely, I know I'll do this. I'll shoot for the phenomenology of INTPs. I'll throw in an INFP video. And I'll say something about ENFJs because I haven't talked about them, and there's some things I want to revise. And I'll do left and right hemispheric divides in the brain. Good night, and thank you.